Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. 2 months after our wedding, my wife Jenna and I stumbled on what looked like the deal of a lifetime while scrolling through budget travel sites at 3 in the morning. A rustic villa in Tuscany for less than half the normal price, and it was available for the exact week we needed. The photos showed sunlit stone walls covered in jasmine, a pool overlooking endless hills of olive groves, and bedrooms with those gorgeous exposed beams you only see in Italian architecture magazines. The listing was from a small agency called Bella Vista Rentals. The website looked old and basic, but the reviews seemed real enough. I was 28, drowning in student loans, and we figured we deserved one nice thing after our courthouse wedding. So, we booked it right away, wiring the deposit overseas, a process that took forever at the bank. The drive from Florence Airport was supposed to take about 90 minutes, according to Google Maps, but it turned into nearly 4 hours of twisting roads that kept getting narrower until our tiny rental Fiat barely fit through. Each turn took us deeper into the countryside, past abandoned farmhouses with caved-in roofs and fields that hadn't been touched in decades. Jenna kept cracking horror movie jokes while recording everything on her phone, but I could tell she was nervous once we lost cell service about an hour from the villa. The property manager, a man named Giorgio, who maybe spoke 10 words of English, met us at a gas station 5 miles away. He said the last stretch of road was too confusing for foreigners to find alone. He drove ahead of us in a beat-up Alfa Romeo that puffed black smoke the entire way, leading us down a dirt road so rough, I was sure our exhaust would fall off before we got there. The villa looked exactly like the photos, which, thinking back, should have been our first red flag, because nothing ever looks that perfect in real life. Every detail seemed staged, from the antique copper pots hanging in the kitchen to the fresh lavender bundles tied neatly to each bedpost, like someone had set it up minutes before we arrived. Giorgio handed us 3 keys on a heavy brass ring, explaining through gestures that one was for the main door, one for the pool house, and one for the cellar, where they kept extra linens and cleaning supplies. Then he pointed at his watch, held up 8 fingers, and gestured toward the morning sun. We figured that meant he'd check on us at 8 the next day. After he left, Jenna and I explored the villa, giddy with disbelief. The frescoed ceilings, the clawfoot bathtub big enough for 2. It all felt unreal. That first day was like something out of a travel show. We cooked pasta using tomatoes from the garden, drank wine at sunset, swam naked under the stars, and made love on the terrace while crickets chirped in the background. By midnight, full of pasta and Chianti, we collapsed into the huge 4-poster bed. The mattress was one of those old horsehair types that molds perfectly to your body. Within minutes, I was out cold. I didn't even wake when Jenna got up to use the bathroom around 2 a.m. The next thing I knew, sunlight was spilling through the shutters and distant church bells were ringing 7 times. The space beside me was cold and empty. At first, I figured Jenna had woken up early to photograph the sunrise, something she always talked about, but never actually did because she hated mornings. I called her name while pulling on my shorts, checked the bathroom, the kitchen, where yesterday's wine glasses still sat unwashed. Then walked out to the pool, expecting to see her floating on one of those flamingo rafts we'd found in the pool house. But the water was still, reflecting the cypress trees like glass. Her camera bag sat untouched on the dresser. I searched every room twice, even ridiculous places like behind curtains and inside the wardrobe, telling myself she was playing some elaborate joke. But Jenna wasn't the prank type. The villa felt strange that morning, too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. About 20 minutes into my panicked search, I remembered the cellar Giorgio had mentioned, the one we hadn't explored, because we were too busy living our dream. The door was tucked behind the kitchen, painted the same faded green as the shutters. The hinges screamed like a dying cat when I opened it. The smell hit me immediately. Not musty, like old wine, but sharp and chemical, like bleach mixed with copper. A single bulb hung from a wire at the bottom of the stone steps, flickering just enough to cast dancing shadows across the concrete floor. From the top of the stairs, I could see dark stains spread across the floor, some old and brown, others still shiny and wet. My brain tried to rationalize wine spills, maybe water damage. But then I saw the zip ties scattered in the corner, the thick, heavy kind police use, and a pile of tangled women's jewelry, dumped like someone had emptied a drawer. I stumbled back up the stairs so fast I slammed my shin against the edge. Splitting it open, I barely noticed the blood. Upstairs, my phone was dead. When I tried to charge it, I realized the power had gone out sometime during the night. The old rotary phone in the kitchen had no dial tone, and even the Wi-Fi router, which had worked fine for our Instagram posts the day before, was dark and unplugged, the cable cleanly cut with what looked like wire cutters. I ran outside screaming Jenna's name until my throat burned, but the sound just vanished into the hills. We hadn't passed another house for miles on the drive-in. The Fiat was still parked where we'd left it, but when I turned the key, nothing happened. No clicking, no sound. Someone had removed the starter cable during the night, while we slept. Giorgio wasn't supposed to return until 8, but I kept checking my dead phone like it would magically tell me the time. The sun felt frozen in the sky, and every rustle from the woods made me jump. I grabbed a large bread knife from the kitchen and sat on the steps, gripping it so tight my hands went numb. The sprinklers turned on automatically, spraying the garden in perfect rhythm, like nothing had changed, while my wife was gone. When I finally heard the rattle of Giorgio's Alfa Romeo coming up the dirt road, I almost cried with relief, but as the car pulled in, I saw he wasn't alone. 2 men were in the back, rough, looking like construction workers, and none of them looked surprised to see me standing there, covered in blood, clutching a knife. The taller man said something to Giorgio in Italian that made him laugh. The kind of laugh you'd hear in a bar, not in a nightmare. They approached slowly, hands raised like they didn't want to startle me. Giorgio kept saying, "Tranquillo, tranquillo," which I knew meant, "Calm down." The younger man, with a scar splitting his eyebrow, pulled out his phone and showed me a video of Jenna. She was sitting in what looked like a warehouse, duct tape over her mouth, eyes wide but alive, still in the sundress from yesterday. Giorgio finally spoke in his broken English. "Business," he said. "Nothing personal. Your family will get message soon. You pay. You go home. Everything fine." The scarred man pulled out zip ties like the ones I'd seen in the cellar. I thought about fighting, 3 against 1 with a bread knife. But then I thought of Jenna and let it fall. They tied my wrists, not too tight, almost like they'd done this before, then led me to a white van parked behind the villa. Inside, the walls were lined with soundproofing foam. There were bottles of water, granola bars, even a portable toilet behind a curtain, like they'd perfected the process of keeping hostages alive and manageable. During the drive, Giorgio sat next to me, scrolling through photos on his phone. Photos of other couples who had stayed at the villa, smiling by the pool, eating dinner, posing in the same place as Jenna and I had just been. He explained in broken English that most families paid within 3 days, that they had friends at Western Union, and that only one couple had ever gone to the police, which hadn't ended well. The younger guy drove while the tall one made calls in Italian, mentioning dollar amounts that made me sick, knowing my parents would have to sell their house to meet those demands. After about 40 minutes, we reached a warehouse in an industrial area outside Arezzo. The constant hum of machinery made it the perfect place to hide anything. They kept Jenna and me in separate rooms, but every few hours, they let me see her through a small window, just long enough to know she was alive. They gave us water, sandwiches, and even supervised bathroom breaks, maintaining this eerie sense of professionalism, like this was all part of some business plan. On the second night, Giorgio handed me a phone to call my dad. He coached me on what to say. No mention of Italy, no mention of police. Just that we were in serious trouble and needed money right away. I heard my father's voice crack on the other end, promising he'd figure it out. Giorgio smiled, patted my shoulder like I'd done well. They moved us twice in 3 days, always at night, always in different vehicles, until I had no idea where we were. On the morning of the 4th day, they dropped us at a rest stop near the A1 motorway, gave us our passports, and a burner phone with one number saved. "Call in 1 hour," Giorgio said, "for car keys." Before he left, he shook my hand like we'd just finished a deal, then leaned close and reminded me that they knew our home address, our parents' addresses, and had friends in America too, so we should never talk about this to anyone. We found our rental car 20 miles away, keys under the mat just like he'd said, with barely enough gas to reach the airport. Jenna didn't say a word the entire drive, just stared out at the countryside that had felt so magical only days before. We told the rental agency someone had stolen the car and we'd found it abandoned. We told our families we'd gotten mixed up with some dangerous people, but managed to pay them off, and we've never told anyone the truth, except for you, strangers on this forum. Because honestly, who would believe us? And worse, we still get emails sometimes, from Italian addresses we don't recognize. Just photos of tourist couples smiling by pools. A reminder that Giorgio and his friends are still out there, watching. The turquoise water looked exactly like the photos when we arrived at Isla Solitaria, this exclusive eco-resort my wife Natalie and I had spent 3 years saving for. We'd been together since college, and after all those years of cheap dates and ramen dinners, this was supposed to be our paradise. A private island about 40 miles off the coast of Belize. The place only hosted 12 couples at a time, and the owner, a silver-haired British guy named Cromwell, greeted each guest personally at the dock with fresh coconut water and a well-rehearsed speech about sustainable tourism. Everything felt perfect that first afternoon. The thatched roof bungalows, the infinity pool overlooking the reef, the way the staff remembered your name after hearing it once. We spent the evening chatting with other couples over rum cocktails, sharing wedding stories and travel plans, completely unaware that within 24 hours, we'd be fighting for our lives. That first night, a storm hit around midnight. The kind of storm that makes you believe in angry gods. Even though I'd grown up in hurricane country, I'd never heard wind like that. It sounded like freight trains colliding. Rain hammered the roof so hard we had to shout just to hear each other from 3 feet away. The power cut out around 2 in the morning, and we huddled together in the suffocating dark, listening to palm trees snap like matchsticks. When dawn came, the island looked like a war zone. Debris everywhere, the beach reshaped, several buildings torn apart. But what made my stomach drop was the silence. We could see 8 bungalows from ours. Not one person in sight, no voices, no movement. Only the resort staff, already outside with wheelbarrows and machetes, cleaning up like nothing unusual had happened. Natalie grabbed my arm as we walked toward the main lodge for breakfast, her nails digging into my skin. She was staring at the Johnsons' bungalow, the retired couple from Minnesota we'd played cards with the night before. Their door was wide open, curtains flapping like surrender flags in the breeze, and their suitcases were still stacked neatly inside, visible from the path. The lodge felt wrong the moment we stepped inside. Only 3 tables had been set, even though 12 couples were supposed to be on the island. The usually cheerful waitstaff moved around silently, avoiding eye contact like we were contagious. Cromwell appeared from his office, his linen shirt somehow crisp despite the humidity, and announced that the morning boat to the mainland had been postponed due to unsafe conditions in the channel. Even though the sky was clear and the ocean calm, we sat near the only other couple eating breakfast. Honeymooners from Canada, though I never caught their names. The wife leaned across her table and whispered that she'd heard screaming during the storm. Not the wind, but actual human screams, and that their neighbors in Bungalow 6 had vanished, their belongings gone too. Her husband quickly shushed her when a waiter walked by, but I noticed how his hand trembled around his coffee cup and how he flinched when Cromwell passed our table with that empty, rehearsed smile. Natalie and I decided to head back and pack up. Something about the whole atmosphere screamed that we needed to leave, storm or not. But when we reached our bungalow, the door was locked from the inside. We heard someone moving around inside, opening drawers, rummaging through our things. The maintenance guy, a weathered local named Baptist with a scar running from his ear to his collarbone, unlocked it for us. He mumbled an apology in broken English about confusion with cleaning schedule, his eyes darting everywhere but at us. Inside, our passports had been moved from the safe to the nightstand, laid open to the photo pages. Natalie's jewelry box sat on the bathroom counter, even though she'd buried it deep in her suitcase. Baptiste hurried off before we could question him, practically running down the path. That's when I noticed it. Every staff member we passed was wearing the same silver medical bracelet, each one engraved not with a name, but with a number. We started packing fast, tossing clothes into bags without folding. I tried calling the mainland ferry service on the room phone, but the line just rang endlessly until a recording in Spanish said the number was no longer in service. Natalie was zipping her suitcase when we heard the Canadian woman screaming near the pool. Not startled, terrified. The kind of scream that comes from pure, raw fear. We ran outside and found her standing by the pool bar, shaking and pointing toward a small storage shed behind the kitchen. Her husband had gone there 10 minutes earlier to look for their missing snorkeling gear. Now the shed was padlocked, and a dark puddle was spreading from beneath the door. Too thick to be water, too red to be anything but blood. Cromwell appeared beside us with two huge staff members, both built like linebackers. He calmly explained that the woman's husband had injured himself on storm debris and was being treated in the island's medical facility, a place none of us had seen during yesterday's tour. The woman screamed that she wanted to see him, begging Cromwell to take her there. He just smiled that empty smile again and nodded to his men, who escorted her away. Natalie and I exchanged a look. We didn't need to say it. We were getting off this island, right now. We rushed back for our bags and headed toward the dock, but the path was blocked by Baptiste and 3 others carrying metal coolers, the kind used for medical transport, all stamped with biohazard symbols. They were loading them onto a golf cart with practiced precision. When Baptiste saw us, he froze, dropped his cooler, and it popped open. For a split second, I saw clear bags filled with ice and something dark red and organic before he slammed it shut and started shouting in Creole for us to go back to our room. We didn't listen. We bolted in the opposite direction, into the dense jungle interior where we'd seen a maintenance trail during yesterday's hike, hoping it would loop around to the dock. The path was barely visible under the storm debris. We climbed over fallen trees and waded through knee-deep pools of muddy water, the sound of shouting and footsteps chasing us through the jungle, Cromwell's British accent mixing with rapid Creole. Half a mile in, we stumbled into a clearing that should not have existed. It was filled with medical equipment, IV stands, monitors, bright surgical lamps, all arranged under camouflage netting. There were gurneys lined up in rows, some still stained dark on the sheets, and a generator humming beside refrigeration units identical to the ones we'd just seen. Their temperature displays glowed red in the shadows. Before I could make sense of it, Natalie grabbed a clipboard hanging from a gurney and went pale as she read it aloud. It was a medical chart with the Johnson woman's name at the top, listing her blood type, tissue compatibility, and a detailed diagram of kidneys, with harvest times written in neat handwriting. The chart underneath had the Canadian man's name, check marks next to liver and corneas, and a red stamp across the bottom that said processing complete. Then we heard a boat engine roar to life down by the dock. Not the resort shuttle, but something bigger. Cromwell's voice carried through the trees, calm and sharp, telling someone on a radio that they had 2 more matches for the Mumbai buyer, and to prep the facility immediately. We dropped everything and ran. Branches tore at our clothes, vines whipped our faces, but we didn't stop. The trees opened suddenly, and there it was, the beach. About 200 yards away, Cromwell's men were loading those same coolers onto a sleek speedboat. Natalie spotted a small motorboat tied to the far side of the dock, half hidden behind the dive shop, probably used by staff for supply runs. We stayed low, creeping along the tree line, using fallen palm fronds as cover. Just as we reached the dive shop, Baptist stepped out from behind a stack of oxygen tanks, holding a syringe filled with something clear. His face was blank, the look of someone who'd done this before. Natalie swung her beach bag at his head with everything she had. It hit hard, sending him crashing into the tanks. The syringe flew from his hand into the sand. We didn't stop to see if he got up. We ran for the motorboat, fumbling with the ropes as Cromwell shouted orders behind us. The engine coughed black smoke before roaring to life, and we sped away just as two men reached the dock, one of them diving into the water after us before giving up. Behind us, the island grew smaller, paradise hiding its nightmare. Natalie steered toward a fishing boat on the horizon, while I kept watch, expecting gunfire or pursuit at any second. The fishermen who pulled us aboard barely spoke English, but they understood when we repeated, "Police," and "Emergency," over and over. They radioed the Belize Coast Guard and sped toward the mainland. It took 3 days of statements, photo identifications, and working with international investigators before authorities raided Isla Solitaria. They found the surgical facility still intact, but everyone was gone. Cromwell had vanished. Investigators later found evidence of at least 40 victims over the last 2 years, mostly young, healthy couples who'd booked special packages through fake travel sites that were actually fronts. Natalie and I testified remotely during several trials that followed, helping shut down 3 connected organ trafficking networks in Central America. But we still wake up some nights thinking we're back in that bungalow, hearing footsteps on the sand outside. The lead investigator told us we were lucky. Most couples who checked into Isla Solitaria never checked out at all. They just became names on missing persons reports. Their organs sold to the highest bidder, while their families kept wondering why they stopped answering emails from paradise. The nightmares haven't stopped since Vermont. Every night takes me back to that cabin, those woods, the moment everything went wrong. Sleep barely comes anymore, and when it does, I wake up screaming his name, sweating, shaking, reaching for someone who isn't there. It's been 8 weeks, and my therapist says writing it all down might help, that sharing could be part of healing. I don't know if I believe that, but I'll try. At 28, I thought I had life figured out. A solid marketing job in Boston, newly married to my college sweetheart, Nathan, after 6 years of dating. We'd saved for 2 years for the perfect honeymoon, but instead of beaches or fancy resorts, we wanted something quieter, something that felt more like us. Nathan found the cabin listing on some obscure rental site. The photos showed a little wooden house tucked between pine trees, with mountain views that looked straight out of a postcard. The drive there in early October was beautiful. Fall colors everywhere, winding roads through small towns where strangers still waved hello. Nathan kept joking about horror movie setups, asking if I'd packed my running shoes in case we had to escape some backwoods killer. I laughed, swatted his arm, and told him he watched too many movies. The GPS died about 40 minutes before we reached the cabin, but the owner, Harold Brennan, had sent printed directions. Each turn took us farther from civilization. The paved road became gravel, then dirt, until we were bumping along what barely qualified as a trail. When the cabin finally came into view, it took my breath away, not because it was stunning, but because of how completely isolated it was. The nearest neighbor was 8 miles away, and there was no cell service at all. Harold had mentioned that in his emails, even offering a satellite phone for extra cost. We declined, thinking it would be romantic to unplug. Harold met us around 4 that afternoon, pulling up in a mud-caked pickup that looked older than I was. He was in his 60s, rail-thin, with pale gray eyes that didn't blink enough and a damp handshake that made my stomach turn. He showed us around the cabin, how to use the wood stove, where the firewood was, how to prime the pump if the water pressure dropped. The whole time he kept bringing up past guests. The Andersons loved the sunrise. The Padels saw a moose down by the creek. Some photographer got an award, winning shot off that deck. I figured he was just lonely and liked to talk. Nathan even joked later that Harold probably didn't get much company. Before leaving, Harold handed us a laminated sheet of emergency numbers and pointed to a red X on a hand-drawn map where we might get 1 bar of signal. about a 15-minute hike uphill. The first 2 days were perfect. We cooked breakfast on the old gas stove, wandered through the woods, made love in the afternoon sunlight. Nathan brought his guitar and played horribly while I laughed at his made-up lyrics. The isolation felt peaceful. No emails, no noise, no world. One night we watched raccoons raid the garbage bins, and Nathan spent 20 minutes trying to get a photo. The cabin had that cozy, rustic charm city people fantasize about. Quilts, old books, board games, cast iron pans, but something felt off. Mirrors, so many mirrors, not decorative ones, plain square, oddly placed, one angled toward the bed, another was mounted high in a living room corner. Even the shower had one. I mentioned it, but Nathan just shrugged and said, "Old houses have weird stuff." Everything changed the third night. We'd hiked all day to a waterfall Harold marked on the map and went to bed early, exhausted. Around 2 a.m., Nathan suddenly sat up. The moonlight lit his face as he listened intently. Then I heard it too, a slow, rhythmic creak from outside, like metal swinging in the wind. But there was no wind. The trees were perfectly still. Nathan said it sounded like it was coming from behind the cabin, near the tool shed. We lay there listening for 10 minutes before he got up. He pulled on jeans and boots, grabbed the flashlight, and told me to lock the door behind him. I begged him not to go, but he smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "I'll be right back." Those were the last words he ever said to me. I watched his flashlight beam through the window until it disappeared around the corner. The creaking stopped. I waited. 5 minutes, 10, 15. I called his name softly, then louder. Nothing. The forest was dead silent. No bugs, no wind, no sound. Just a heavy, unnatural quiet. I threw on my coat, grabbed my purse flashlight, and stepped onto the porch. The wood groaned under my feet. Around the corner, the shed door swung open. Nathan's flashlight lay on the ground, its beam aimed toward the trees. A dark stain spread across the dirt. Blood, though I didn't know it for sure yet. I ran back inside, slammed the door, and pushed a dresser against it. My brain was chaos. No phone signal, no car keys. Nathan had them. The nearest help was miles away through pitch black woods. I remembered Harold's map and the cell signal spot, but the idea of hiking there alone in the dark was impossible. So I waited, knife in hand. Every sound, wood creaking, the fridge humming, branches brushing the roof, made me jump. I whispered Nathan's name until my throat hurt. When dawn came, I forced myself outside. The blood trail led toward the woods, then vanished. There were drag marks, 2 deep grooves. Nathan's wedding ring lay near the tree line. Seeing it broke something in me. I hiked to the signal spot, shaking the whole way, convinced someone was following me. When I finally got a single bar, I dialed 911 with trembling hands. State police arrived within an hour, followed by search teams and dogs. They treated me like a suspect at first, asking the same questions again and again. The dogs picked up Nathan's scent but lost it at a creek half a mile away. Then one officer spotted something on a tree, a small device, painted to blend in, a camera. Once they found that one, they found dozens, hidden in trees, under eaves, even in fake birdhouses. Inside the cabin, the mirrors turned out to be 2-way glass. Cameras everywhere. The bedroom, bathroom, living room. The footage led investigators to Harold's secondary property, 3 miles away. In his basement they found a server room, and what it contained made national news. For 11 years, Harold had been running a dark web streaming site where people paid to watch guests in his cabins. The Vermont one was the most popular because of how remote it was. Subscribers could even pay extra to vote on special interactions. One user, BearHunter47, had paid Harold $20,000 the week we arrived. His messages made me sick. He'd been watching us since day one, commenting on what I wore, how Nathan made coffee. He'd asked Harold to create a scenario to separate us on the third night. Harold confessed everything. He'd used hidden speakers to make sounds that lured guests outside, usually just for entertainment value. But BearHunter47 wasn't like the others. He was Christopher Voss, a 43-year-old father of 2 from New Hampshire. Police found Nathan's blood in his van, along with rope, tools, and trophies from other victims. They caught Voss at his family's hunting cabin, but Nathan's body was never found. Voss got life without parole. Harold got 25 years. The FBI is still hunting down subscribers who watched the streams. Some voyeurs, others like Voss. They said my case stopped at least 3 more planned interactions. The other cabins, one in Maine, one in New Hampshire, were wired the same way. Some couples had unknowingly been filmed for years, their anniversaries turned into content, their love lives dissected by strangers online. What haunts me most isn't just losing Nathan. It's knowing our final days together were entertainment. People watched us eat, kiss, argue, sleep, make love. Every tender moment turned into a spectacle for strangers. Even now, clips of us exist online, tagged with our names. The FBI says they're working to scrub them, but I know that's impossible. Once something's online, it lives forever, in dark corners traded like souvenirs. I've moved twice since then, changed my name, checked every wall and ceiling for hidden cameras. But some nights, I still wake up certain that someone's watching me. Nathan's mom calls sometimes and we cry together. We lost him not just to a murderer, but to an audience. Northern Michigan gets quiet after Labor Day. That's exactly why Melissa and I decided to rent a lakefront cottage for our 5th anniversary in early September. My wife had been pulling double shifts doing medical transcription all summer, and between that and my online teaching job, we both needed a real break. A coworker told me about a site where owners list their properties cheap when last-minute cancellations happen. That's how we found it. A 2-bedroom cottage with its own dock, surrounded by pine forest, for less than what we'd pay for a basic motel. 5 years of marriage and nearing 30 had taught us to spot a deal when we saw one, even if the photos looked dated and the reviews were suspiciously few. We packed our old Honda Accord with enough groceries for a week, tossed in swimsuits and a few books we'd been meaning to read, then drove 6 hours north from Chicago through long, empty stretches of highway. The GPS lost signal twice during the last hour, so we had to rely on a hand-drawn map the owner emailed, complete with landmarks like Big Dead Oak and Rusted Blue Mailbox. When we finally pulled into the gravel driveway that Thursday afternoon, the isolation hit instantly. Just trees, water, and silence. The cottage looked like something frozen in 1987, wood paneling everywhere, a stone fireplace blackened with old soot, and kitchen appliances in shades of avocado green and mustard yellow. While Melissa tested the squeaky bed and unpacked into a cedar-scented dresser that smelled like mothballs, I wandered the property. The dock stretched about 20 feet into the lake, sturdy but weathered, with a small aluminum rowboat tied at the end and a ladder descending into dark water that looked almost black. Behind the cottage stood a padlocked shed with a handwritten KEOUT sign. The owner had mentioned it 3 times in his emails. Curiosity made me peek through a gap in the boards. Just shadows and shapes that looked like old furniture covered with tarps. Across the lake, maybe 300 yards away, was nothing but trees. No houses, no docks, no signs of life at all. That first evening felt like something out of a romance movie. We grilled burgers on a rusty old barbecue, shared a bottle of wine while sitting on the dock, and watched the sun sink behind the pines. Around 10:30, when I stepped outside to grab our forgotten wine glasses, a pinprick of light caught my eye across the lake. It moved slowly between the trees, too steady to be a firefly, too deliberate to be someone just walking around. Friday morning was perfect, the kind of peace you only find in places like that. Loons calling across the water, mist curling up from the lake like smoke, and Melissa in my old college sweatshirt making pancakes. We spent the day doing absolutely nothing. Reading on the dock, rowing to the center of the lake, napping in the hammock between 2 giant pines. The water was colder than expected, but clear enough to see your feet when you stood waist deep. We even found a group of painted turtles sunbathing on a half-submerged log. Around dinner, while I was firing up the grill for fish, Melissa called me to the window. Her voice was shaky. Across the lake, at the tree line, stood someone, barely visible in the fading light, just a dark shape against the woods. We watched for about 5 minutes, wondering whether to wave or just ignore them. But when the person raised what looked like binoculars and aimed them directly at our cottage, my stomach turned. The second I lifted my hand in a hesitant wave, they stepped backward into the trees and vanished. We tried to laugh it off over dinner, made jokes about curious locals, but neither of us could shake the feeling of being watched. Melissa insisted we close all the curtains that night, and for the first time I double-checked the locks before bed. Around 2 a.m., I woke up needing the bathroom and noticed a faint glow through the curtains. At first, I thought it was the moon, but when I peeked out, that same flashlight beam swept slowly across our cottage from the opposite shore. It moved methodically, pausing at each window like someone was studying every room. When it reached the bedroom, it stopped, and I swear, even across that black stretch of water, I knew whoever held that light was staring right at me. Saturday morning brought our first real argument in months. Melissa wanted to leave. I kept saying we were overreacting to some nosy neighbor. She reminded me about the low price, the lack of reviews, and how fast the owner confirmed our booking. Details that now sounded less like luck and more like red flags. But I didn't want to back down. I'd planned this trip for months, and I wasn't about to let some creep ruin it. We compromised we'd spend the day away from the cottage. We drove 40 minutes to the nearest town and ate lunch at a diner full of taxidermy and locals who stared at us like we didn't belong. The teenage waitress froze when we mentioned we were staying at the old Carlson place. Her face shifted from polite curiosity to quiet pity before she turned away and started refilling our already full coffee cups. On the drive back, Melissa scrolled through her phone, searching for reviews or photos of our rental, but the listing had completely vanished from the site. When we got back around 5, I noticed something immediately. The padlock on the shed was hanging open, the door slightly ajar. My first thought was that the owner had dropped by, but there was no note, no call, nothing. Despite Melissa's protests, I grabbed my phone's flashlight and pushed the door open. Inside was the expected junk: moldy life jackets, old fishing rods, stacks of rotting newspapers. But along the back wall was something that made my blood run cold. A neat row of flashlights, at least a dozen of them, all clean, all modern, lined up like trophies. Below them, tacked to the wall, were printed screenshots from rental sites. Different listings of our same cottage, each with different names, prices, and seasons. It looked like someone had been creating and deleting ads for years. Each printout had highlighted names, couples, booking dates, every week, long stay going back 2 years. When I rushed back to the cottage, Melissa was already packing. Her face was pale and set. She'd held up her phone. She'd found a post in a local Facebook group from the previous summer. A woman described someone watching her and her husband from across the lake. When they complained to the owner, he said he didn't even know what property they were talking about. That's when it all clicked. The cheap price, the eager confirmation, the owner who only emailed and insisted on wire transfer payment. We hadn't rented a cottage, we'd been lured there. Then came the footsteps on the deck, heavy, slow, deliberate. When I peeked through the window, a man was standing at our door, still, silent, one hand pressed against the wood like he was feeling for movement inside. He was maybe 60, thin, clothes stiff and faded from sun and water. His hair was uneven, like he cut it himself, and his fingernails were long enough to click when he brushed them against the door. When he finally knocked, 3 slow, measured taps. Melissa gripped my arm, shaking her head, but I needed to know. I opened the door just a crack, keeping the chain on. The smell hit me first: mildew, dirt, something chemical. His eyes were eager, too eager. Like a child about to show you something they're proud of. He asked if we were enjoying our stay in a raspy, too high voice. When I asked who he was, he smiled and said he was the one, keeping us safe at night, watching from across the lake, making sure nobody bothered us. The tactical flashlight on his belt still had smudges from being pressed against glass. Before I could react, he slid something through the gap in the door, a stack of Polaroid photos that scattered across the floor. They were all of us, Melissa and me, eating breakfast, reading on the couch, getting ready for bed. Private moments all taken through the windows over the past 2 days. Mixed in were older photos, other couples, same cottage, same poses, different seasons. He kept talking as I stared, explaining how he'd lived across the lake for 15 years, how the cottage had been empty until he figured out how to list it online, how he only picked nice couples who needed peace. The money, he said, went to pay property taxes and keep the electricity on. He sounded proud, like he'd done something good. When I started yelling for him to leave, he looked genuinely confused, asking if we didn't like how he'd cleaned or if we needed more towels. I slammed the door while Melissa tried calling 911, but the signal kept cutting out. Through the window, we saw him still standing there, swaying gently like he was listening to music. After 10 minutes of failed calls, we grabbed our bags and ran. The second we opened the door, he stepped aside politely, offering to help with our luggage. We sprinted to the car, and as I turned the key, he called out, saying he had something to show us, something special he'd built for his guests. We sped off down the gravel road. In the rearview mirror, I saw him lift a metal hatch near the shed and disappear underground. We finally got signal 20 minutes later and called the police from a gas station. Our hands shook so badly we could barely hold the phones. Deputies met us there, exchanged uneasy glances as we told them everything, then followed us back to the property. Vernon Keller, that was his name, was gone. But what they found made the local news for weeks. Beneath the property was a massive network of tunnels he'd spent years digging. They connected the cottage to 3 observation points around the lake, including a furnished underground room directly beneath the master bedroom. The walls were covered in photos, records, and fake listings. Dozens of couples, years of footage. Vernon had been a mining engineer before a breakdown in his 50s. He'd been living off rental income, perfecting his hidden system with ventilation shafts disguised as tree stumps and power lines spliced from the cottage itself. He turned himself in 3 days later at a Wisconsin hospital, dehydrated, rambling about how he took care of his guests. He swore he never hurt anyone, never even entered the cottage while it was occupied. He just watched to make sure everyone was happy. The real owners, an elderly couple from Indiana who hadn't visited in years, were horrified. Police found records of at least 17 couples who'd been scammed the same way. The tunnels were filled in, the cottage demolished. But sometimes I still dream about that flashlight sweeping across our windows, realizing now that the man holding it might not have been across the lake at all. He might have been right beneath us. Melissa and I are still together, stronger, maybe, but we don't take remote vacations anymore. And even in normal hotel rooms, she still checks under the bed for holes that probably aren't there.